Hi, just a quick note before we get to the podcast today. I'm covering Anneliese Michel again because she's buried not particularly far from where I live now in Germany. And I find her story compelling. A victim soul and a botched exorcism. Exorcisms have to be done with great care, and this is an instance of not all steps being taken. What really speaks to me is how would you or any of us respond if asked, would we suffer for souls? That's what Anneliese told her friends she was asked to do. She said she had an apparition of the Virgin Mary and was asked if she would do this. And when Mother Mary came back to her, she said she would. She didn't know what aspect of suffering specifically she would have. She had seizures, she had other problems, but they quickly turned into something very dark. And the botched exorcism unfortunately led to her death. And priests went to prison over this. So this is a cautionary tale. But I do think she's forgotten because her form of suffering was possession, and that is extremely rare. Many saints, blesseds and venerables, suffer illness, paralysis, the stigmata. I'm sure you can think of many other things, but this is an instance where she had a profound suffering and it was voluntary, and it unfortunately led to her death. So let's get to the podcast. Oh, and one last thing. The pictures are of me and my children almost 2 years ago now, and they are of trying to find the cemetery, finding it, and then standing in front of her grave. Enjoy the listen.
Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going deep into a book called Anneliese Michel ut ihre Dämonen.
Yeah, this one is a tough one.
It is. It's about this young woman, Anneliese Michel. And, her story is pretty intense. It deals with, purported possession and, tragically, her death. So, a sensitive topic for sure.
Definitely. We'll be looking at all of it, though. The information, all the information that this book gives us. And, we always want you, the listener, to draw your own conclusions.
Always. We'll guide you through the information. But at the end of the day, it's up to you to decide what you think about Anneliese and what happened to her.
Exactly.
All right. So this book kicks off by talking about Anneliese's early life, her childhood.
Seems like a pretty normal childhood, right?
Yeah, totally. She grew up in a devout Catholic family, very much rooted in her faith. But things take a pretty dark turn. Like, she starts having these visions, and she experiences some pretty severe physical problems.
Yeah, the book calls these visions fratzen, which translates to demonic faces. I mean,
whoa.
Hard to even imagine, right?
Oh, absolutely. And it wasn't just the visions. She also had this, problem with horrible smells, like foul odors. And she even had trouble walking.
Right. I mean, no wonder her family started looking for medical help. That's a lot to deal with.
You would think so, right? And that's actually where things get, complicated. This is where the question of, is it a mental illness or is it something, more, that question comes up.
Yeah. I mean, that's a tough one, right? But what's interesting is the book actually points out how several priests who knew Anneliese, they were convinced. They thought she was possessed.
No kidding.
Yeah, there's even a statement from Father Alt, and he's basically saying that everyone, the priests, the family, everyone involved agreed it wasn't just a mental health issue. They thought it was genuine demonic possession.
Wow. That's a pretty serious thing to say.
Yeah, it is. And it kind of sets the stage for the rest of the story,
Oh, totally. But before we get into, the really heavy stuff, the exorcisms and all that, there's this, almost like a glimmer of hope. It happens right before things really get bad. And it's kind of like something out of the Bible.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so Anneliese is having trouble walking, right? But she suddenly experiences this miraculous healing while she's out walking with her boyfriend.
Wow, a miracle.
That's what it seems like. And she attributed it to an apparition of the Blessed Virgin Mary.
Wow, that must have been incredible for her.
Oh, totally. Yeah. You can imagine the joy, the relief. But, and here's where things take another turn, Mary asks Anneliese to do something pretty extraordinary.
What's that?
She asks her to accept suffering as a penance, like a sacrifice for the salvation of souls.
Whoa. I mean, talk about a heavy burden.
Yeah, especially after everything she's already been through, right?
Right. I mean, how do you even process that?
Well, according to the book, Anneliese was really torn. Like, it was a huge internal struggle. But in the end, her love for God, her faith, it was so strong, she accepted this request.
Wow. That takes some serious devotion.
Yeah, it really does. And this whole thing is acceptance of suffering. It's actually central to the concept of victim soul.
Yeah. And we're going to get into that later. It's a pretty complex idea in the Catholic tradition.
Yeah, definitely a lot to unpack there. But with Anneliese accepting this path of suffering, it kind of sets the stage for the really intense period of exorcisms.
Right. That becomes like the defining part of her story.
Yeah, it does. And, well, I'm really curious to hear more about these exorcisms. The book, it describes some pretty striking events, like things that really make you wonder.
Oh, I know what you mean. Like the book goes into detail about this struggle, this almost like a battle between the priests and these, the demonic forces.
In bed.
Yeah. Like it claims that Anneliese could tell the difference between different kinds of holy water.
Wow.
And even more strange is that the demons, when they were speaking through Anneliese, they knew a bunch of languages.
Seriously?
Yeah, and they were fluent too. Like there's even a part where one of the demons corrects Father Renz's Latin.
No way.
I know, it's creepy, right? It's like they were showing off or something.
Yeah, that's pretty unsettling. And it wasn't just languages, right?
No, it gets weirder. The book says that Lucifer, speaking through Anneliese, he actually commented on like bigger issues, stuff like, society losing its faith and how important prayer is. It's wild. Makes you think, even if it is coming from supposedly a demon.
It definitely makes you think.
It really does. And it makes you wonder, if this is all like part of a bigger picture. Maybe there's a reason why these demons were targeting Anneliese specifically.
Okay, now you're getting into some interesting territory.
Yeah, like what if it wasn't just random? What if they were after her because of her potential as a victim soul?
That's a good point.
Right. So, like we were saying earlier, we need to dive a little deeper into this victim soul concept. It's pretty important if you want to understand, what this book is trying to say about Anneliese's experience.
Okay, so break it down for me. What is a victim soul?
All right. So basically, in Catholic teaching, there's this idea of redemptive suffering.
Okay, I've heard of that.
Yeah. It's basically the idea that when suffering is united with like Christ's suffering, it can have this power, a power to like save people, and not just the person who's suffering, but others too.
So it's not just about enduring pain, it's about offering it up for something bigger.
Yeah, exactly. It's about sacrifice. So victim souls, they're these people who they freely choose to offer up their suffering, and they do it as a way to atone for other people's sins.
Wow. So they're like taking on the burden for others. That's pretty heavy.
It is. But that's the idea, right? To help people find salvation. And this book, it's arguing that Anneliese fits this description. She was a victim soul.
Okay, I can kind of see that, especially with her accepting Mary's request,
Mm-hmm.
the whole suffering is penance thing.
Right. And there's more. The book uses some of Anneliese's own words to back this up, like stuff from her diary, conversations she had with people. And she talks about her suffering having a purpose. Like it wasn't just meaningless pain. She believed she was helping to save souls.
And wasn't there something in her diary, like a quote from Jesus? Something about suffering having meaning.
Yeah. He says, "Every suffering, even the most commonplace, bears much fruit when it is united to my suffering." It's right there in her diary.
Man, that is powerful.
Right. It really makes you think about, like, even the worst pain, the darkest times, they can be transformed.
Okay, so that makes sense. But I got to ask, if Anneliese was this victim soul, fighting evil with her suffering, why wasn't she saved? Why did she have to die?
Yeah, that's a tough one. The book talks about that too. And it's something a lot of people have asked about this case.
I mean, if she was really doing all this good, offering herself up like that, wouldn't God have stepped in?
It's a natural question to ask, right? I mean, we want to believe that good is rewarded, but this book, it frames Anneliese's death as like the ultimate sacrifice, the culmination of everything she went through.
So even in her death, she was fulfilling her purpose.
That's what it seems like. It's saying that her death, as awful as it was, it actually had this huge spiritual impact.
Huh. I guess that's one way to look at it.
It's a hard thing to understand,
Right.
But it does make you think about how powerful faith can be, even in the face of death.
Yeah. And it reminds me of this whole idea of intercession,
Yeah.
praying for others, helping them spiritually. If Anneliese was a victim soul, her story is like proof that this stuff actually works.
Exactly. It shows that even when we think we're alone in our struggles, there's this whole spiritual network out there. People praying for each other, supporting each other. It's pretty amazing when you think about it.
It is. And, well, her story doesn't end with her death, right?
Yeah.
What about the trial? All the controversy?
Oh, right. There's a whole lot more to unpack. This book, it doesn't shy away from any of that.
Well, let's hear it. What happened after Anneliese died? It must have been a nightmare for her family and the priests, too.
It was, and the book talks about how everyone dealt with it, the grief, the legal battles. But what's really interesting is it suggests that the trial and all the media attention, it was like another attack.
What do you mean?
Like they were trying to discredit Anneliese to make it seem like it was all in her head. Mental illness or some kind of religious fanaticism. It's almost like even after her death, the battle was still going on.
Wow, so they were still trying to silence her story.
Yeah, it really seems that way. And the book connects this to the whole spiritual warfare thing, right? The forces of evil, they wanted to bury her story, keep people from being inspired by her faith.
That's a pretty heavy accusation.
It is. But even with all that, Anneliese's story, it just won't go away. People are still fascinated by her. Even after all these years, books, movies, people still talk about her. It's like her story has this power that can't be silenced.
Yeah, there's definitely something about her story that stays with you.
Right. It makes you think about the big questions, faith, suffering, good versus evil. It's a story that challenges us.
Absolutely. And on that note, maybe it's time to wrap up this part of our deep dive. What do you say?
Yeah, good idea. But before we do, I have one last question for you and for everyone listening. If Anneliese's suffering was really an act of love and sacrifice, what does that mean for us? How can we apply her story to our own lives, our own spiritual journeys? Something to think about. It's a question that really makes you stop and think, what can we learn from all of this?
Yeah. I mean, it's a lot to process. Suffering, sacrifice.
It is, but I think one of the big takeaways is that faith, it can get you through anything, even when things are really dark.
Right. Anneliese's story shows us that. But the book goes even further. It's not just about enduring. It's about making a difference. Her suffering, according to the book, it had a real impact.
Totally. It wasn't just about her. She was, she was touching other people's lives, even making a dent in the spiritual world.
Almost like she was a warrior,
Yeah.
Fighting evil with her suffering.
Exactly. And it makes you think about your own life, right? What impact are we having? What are we willing to do for others?
Heavy stuff.
It is. And this idea of intercession, remember that. Praying for each other, supporting each other, it's all connected, Anneliese's story shows just how powerful that can be.
Yeah. It's like we're all part of this bigger spiritual picture. We're not alone in our struggles.
Exactly. And that's where hope comes in, Yeah. Even though Anneliese's story is tragic, there's this thread of hope that runs through it. Even in the darkest times, there's this belief in something bigger, something good. Her faith, her love, it shines through.
Yeah, you're right. It's inspiring. It makes you want to step up your own game,
I know what you mean. It makes you ask yourself, am I living my faith to the fullest? Am I willing to make sacrifices?
Tough questions. But important ones.
They are. And that's what Anneliese's story does, right? It makes us think. It pushes us to go deeper.
Yeah, it's not just some story from the past. It's relevant to all of us, even today.
Absolutely. It reminds us that suffering, it's a part of life, but it can be meaningful. And it can be transformed when we unite it with Christ.
And that's a powerful message, no matter who you are or what you believe.
Well said. And with that, I think it's time to wrap up our deep dive into the life of Anneliese Michel. It's been a journey, that's for sure.
It has. Thank you all for joining us. We hope this conversation has given you something to think about, something to hold on to.
And if you're interested in learning more about Anneliese, be sure to check out the book, Anneliese Michel and Ira Damonen. It's a tough read, but it's worth it.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep the conversation going.